G'day, Year 11, welcome back. We're going to continue on today with Lesson 12 of Personal and Social Identity. Today what we're going to look at is adolescence as a social construct. So that idea of adolescence, what is it, how does it come to be, what do we think about it, all of those answers will be explained in the lesson. So first of all, go to page 31 of your syllabus. Add the dot point. Sorry for yawning there. The dot point is just below the nature and nurture. So adolescence is a social construct and its validity for different cultures. I might just add there. We'll learn a bit more about sort of the idea of its validity for different cultures a bit later in this topic. We're going to focus on our own culture now in terms of how we view adolescence in the Western world. So without further ado, here we go. So get this all down. That as your heading, and that is your notes. So I thought we should sort of look and define what adolescence is first. What is it about this term that we already understand? Obviously we can't have that class discussion, but what comes to your mind might be certain age brackets. Say from the age, high school age bracket is probably the most common, 13 to 18 or 12 to 17 depending on when you're born. You can sort of see that progression of adolescence is a very important and big part of our socialization process and how we have grown up over time. So the sort of term adolescence itself and all the values, morals, rituals, rites of passage and different things like that we hone in on adolescence is definitely a social construct in the way that we have determined what age that is. And also there's evidence to explain that sort of that age bracket of adolescence has changed significantly over time. If we look at when people were considered an adult 1,000 years ago, it was a lot younger. A lot of the time people were getting married around the age of 13, 14. You in some senses you grew up a lot quicker back then because you were more exposed to extenuating, life-threatening circumstances. So, whereas now we're in a fortunate situation where we're living longer, we can focus more attention on those formative years when you are young. So that's sort of just a brief example of. Sorry, that's sort of a brief example of how that can change over time. And it's going to continue to expand in the future as well, I think, is a really important point. Parts of the reason that this has developed is because our society has become more specialised over time. What I mean by that is there's a theory in a history book, it's quite interesting, but I'll give you the shortened version. Essentially, farming is the reason that our society is very advanced, particularly Western culture. So what I mean by that is if you go back 5,000-6,000 years ago, whatever it is, you are going to spend most of your day and most of the time when the sun is shining hunting for food, so you don't starve to death, trying to find clear sources of water so you don't thirst to death, spending your time fixing shelters, as well as making absolutely everything you have for scratch, like your spears that you need to hunt with, your clothes, your lifestyle, everything about it is sort of back then is very much dependent on you. You can't just go down to Coles and find this or that. So as we advance over time and those essential needs are taken care of, so for example through things like farming, we can mass produce food, so there's food available now for the week instead of day to day. That gives us a lot more time, right, to think about other things and ideas and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is that over time we get to the point now in society where all our fundamental and basic needs are pretty much taken care of at any given point: food, shelter, water, connections with people, networking, all of that is taken care of. So that means we can spend our time doing other things, such as spending it on education than previous generations. So that would mean that when people are entering the workforce, because we can spend more time in school, they're entering the workforce at a later age, right? They're hitting those adult milestones that were traditionally happening a lot younger at a far later age. So therefore our sort of social construct and idea of adolescence is changing as well. That's why the time gap, I believe, has gotten bigger. It may continue to expand over time as well, and things like that. So what this means for you guys, and for me as well, is that there are extended times of dependency on your parents. They're longer, you're living at home with them longer. A lot of studies are showing that people are living at home a lot longer than they used to be. Obviously, there's a lot of other reasons for that, like the insanely expensive house market that we have. But your youth, I suppose, is extended. The time where you are young is a lot longer than previous generations. If you look back at your parents, even that gap of 2 or 3 years, a lot of people were leaving school around 14, 15, 16 to get full-time jobs. So that's sort of that idea of that click over when they became more adult-like, whereas for you, you've got the end of school, but you've also got university now, and that expectation that you're still a student for another 4, 5, even 6 years after actually finishing school. So you get this concept of you're quite young in your mid and late 20s, whereas back in your parents' age that was unheard of. You're meant to have a full kids and things like that. So you can see that this shifting perspective of adolescence has changed how we view everything else. What this has done is created also a delay in the age of marriage and children. So a lot of people are getting married a lot older. I'm not saying this is a bad thing or anything, by the way. It's just like I'm just trying to highlight that life cycle of adolescence and how it is a social construct, because it has changed significantly over time. Being beyond childhood but not yet considered an adult is often a fundamental issue with adolescence. I felt like that when I was younger. Like, if I was acting up, I was old enough to know better, but I wasn't old enough to know better with other things. I was considered too young and immature to be able to listen to that conversation or be part of that group or whatever it was. So it has created its own sort of barriers in terms of that blend of where people fall under. You've also got elements of maturity and things that come into play as well. But lack of rights and recognition can be a problem for some. For other people, it's a waiting game. So a lot of people, they're just waiting for it to be over so they can move on. Whereas for others, it can be the best and most exciting time of your life. So adolescence is really different for different people, but it is definitely a social construct, and in our culture particularly, and I think amongst a lot of other cultures around the world as well, it's definitely changing a lot over time. Alright, so that's adolescence sort of recapped there. Now in this next slide we're going to look at, I've got some questions for you. So there are quite a lot of questions, there's 6 of them, and I want them to be fairly in-depth. So what I want you to do with question 1 is create a mind map of words or ideas that you would associate with adolescent experience. So what is it about being an adolescent? What are some words that come to your mind? Is it girlfriend, boyfriend, school, partying, underage drinking? Like, what are the words and ideas you associate with adolescence? Could it be identity? Could it be challenging? Could it be sad? Could it be happy? Whatever it is, I want you to construct a mind map of words, as many as you can, in 5 minutes. Give yourself 5 minutes and just write as many as you absolutely can. After you've done that sort of mini map, you're going to have this idea of what adolescence looks like for you. So that would be very beneficial for you to do. Question 2, What I want you to do here is describe the responsibilities expected of adolescents today. So what are those responsibilities? Do you think? So you might obviously be relating to your own micro thing, but is it things like you going to school, getting an education, maybe going to university after school, not being a dropout, you're expected to be mature? What is it about these expectations or responsibilities that we're placing on adolescents today? And then the second sort of part of that question is, do you think these expectations are both realistic and achievable? Yes, no, why? That'll be interesting to read. Question 3. How would you describe the rights given to adolescents today? So that's the first part of this question. So would you describe them to be a positive or negative thing, for example? So what I mean by rights given is, if you compare how you've grown up to when your parents grew up, you have a lot more rights and sort of freedoms, I think, in a lot of aspects than they did. But at the same time, you might be more restricted with certain things. Then I want you to sort of answer that question. Do you think you have too many rights? So a lot of boomers out there, for lack of a better word, have that idea that, you know, you're all spoilt snowflakes and you've got too many rights, you know, you're being too precious. Do you think that's the case? Like, seriously, do you think that's the case, or do you not? Why not? Question 4, I want you to look at what you think is the biggest pro of your adolescence experience so far. What is the best thing about it? And then likewise for question 5, countering that and contrasting it, I want you to think, what is the biggest con? So what is the biggest negative of your adolescent experience so far? What I want you to do after that, the last question, is I want you to compare your adolescent experience with that of your parents. So I want you to write a table of continuity and changes and then compare that to yours. So what I mean by that is, so you draw up your table. I'll just do a slide to sort of show you what it would look like. So you do continuity and change, and you would list up to 5 things here and 5 things there, and ask your parents because you're obviously at home with them, sorry, I'll start again. So you're going to ask them, your parents, about their adolescent experience. So just have a 5-minute conversation with them. What was it like for you growing up? What was school like? How was it when you got to see your friends? Were you expected to get a job straight away? What was it like growing up in the 60s, 70s, whatever it was? Do you think technology's had a big influence? Whatever it is, I want you to sort of have a genuine conversation with them and note sort of 5 things that have stayed the same when you're comparing it to your own, and what are 5 things that have changed for you. So for example, obviously one example of something that has changed dramatically between your parents' generation and yours would be this concept of technology and its impact. I would definitely say that's been one of the biggest changes. Something that's stayed the same is probably that idea of, I'm just trying to think, how do I describe this? What's the word I'm looking for? I suppose something that stayed the same is that idea of adolescence is a time for growth. Sorry, I can't think of the best way to word it. So, right, adolescence being a time of growth. So that this concept that people are expecting you to make mistakes and have pitfalls and no, I want it with a CE. That idea has remained the same across time. So have a chat to them. It might be different from parent to parent, because they might be in different generations, but that'll be interesting to note. Once you have done that and those 6 questions, here's your summary task. I want you to judge or evaluate who had it better in terms of adolescence, your parents or you. What do you think? Let me know. That's it for today. I'll see you in the next one. Make sure you're staying safe, and hopefully I'll get to see you guys soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.